I sing in a church choir. As such, I often get asked to sing at funerals whenever there's a death in the congregation. I'm generally happy to bring some comfort to the bereaved in this way. The opportunity to do so came up again last week, and what could I say but yes? The deceased gentleman had been a parishioner at the church where I sing. Still, I hadn't known him very well. I found myself in the position of learning more about him after his death than I had during his life. I knew this guy had served in public office. Now I learned more about the causes he had championed while in office. I learned how much he valued serving the public, not just in office, but in the military, helping students in academia, even cooking breakfast for a homeless shelter. The word generous came up quite a bit to describe how he helped others. I learned he was a published author. I learned he was a horrible speller, which caused issues when he took up crossword puzzles in his later years. I learned he'd been married for over 60 years, and a little about his children and grandchildren. I learned how he was a man of faith, working for the diocese and leading his family in prayer together around the table. I also learned things about him that weren't mentioned in the funeral. In particular, I learned that he was polyamorous. Now, this word is often abused by its detractors, so let's be clear on what it means. It does not mean sleeping around. It does not mean having no interest in serious relationships. It does not mean going behind your partner's back. It means having or being open to more than one committed relationship at the same time, with the full knowledge and consent of everyone involved. So it was with this gentleman. Apparently, with his wife's blessing, he had taken on a second relationship with a same-sex partner, which had lasted for a significant time. Not a word about this came up at the funeral, of course. And as I sat reflecting during the funeral, something about that came to bother me. It wasn't the fact that he was poly, not at all. It was connected to how he'd had to hide it. And it wasn't just his hiding it and so not acknowledging an important part of his life. It was that hiding it now had potential consequences. I don't know if that second relationship was still ongoing at the time of his passing. But if it was, that second partner would be in mourning, just like this man's wife, children, and grandchildren. To be clear, I am all for extending comfort to the widow and children and grandchildren. But surely the second partner's grief also matters. Is it really right to sweep this partner under the rug and pretend that his grief is illegitimate or trivial? That doesn't sit well with me. Grief is grief, no matter who's going through it. And even if you thoroughly disapprove of polyamory, surely a pastoral approach is more called for and more profitable than finger-wagging could ever be. And that assumes that you do, in fact, disapprove of polyamory, which I don't. In fact, not only do I not disapprove, but the deceased gentleman and his story remind me that I have a closet of my own that I need to come out of. You see, I'm polyamorous myself. As such, I have a lot of sympathy for this gentleman. And further, I wish I'd known his secret during his lifetime. If only I'd known, maybe we could have talked. Maybe we could have found a listening ear and a confidant in each other. Maybe we could have networked and found a larger community that's more supportive of us. And maybe, just maybe, I'd feel a little less alone about it in the church than I do today. Alas, it's too late now. At this point, I can see some people ask, and with reason, why don't I just do something about it if I feel so alone about being poly in the church? Well, that's a fair question, but maybe you can explain to me what exactly I should do about it. I mean, I can't exactly give up being poly. It's part of who I am. Should I give up the people I know in the church, who are in many ways like family, and whom I can otherwise confide in quite a bit? I'm reluctant to do that without a damn good reason. Well, maybe I should consider finding a different community, one that's more supportive of polyfolk like me. That one's tempting, but it runs into the snag of a second closet I need to come out of. You see, the poly community and its allies tend to be solidly on the political left, very often the hard left. But I'm not. I was on the left at one time, and people of my temperament tend naturally to lean left. However, I find myself on the conservative side of the spectrum, and very much drawn to tradition. In this, I part ways with a deceased gentleman who was very liberal and had little use for tradition. So I'm sure you can see the conflict. I find myself with a foot in each of two communities, the conservative and the poly ones. These communities don't have much overlap and are not each other's best friends. In fact, it sometimes seems to me that members of each see the other as a symptom of everything that's wrong with the world. I don't agree with them on that. I don't see either conservatism or polyamory as a sin, and I resent having to feel caught in the middle in a fight that really never needed to happen. But there's also an intrinsic tension in the West between conservatism and polyamory. Here, tradition points very much to monogamy in relationships. Being poly pushes against that. And so I struggle with two parts of my identity, both of which are part of who I am, neither of which I can just discard, but which are in tension with each other. And I wrestle with how to reconcile them. I can see this conflict leading some people to ask another question of me. If coming out leads to the inconvenience of getting flack from both the conservative and poly sides, well, why am I coming out at all? Well, it's not because of convenience, which is rarely a selling point for me when I'm making a decision. Several other considerations, by contrast, do carry significantly more weight in my mind. Number one, I try to live with integrity. I try to be authentic and to not live a lie. But for better or for worse, I really feel that conflicts with staying in the closet. I've felt for some time that staying in the closet has meant wearing a mask and hiding significant parts of my real self from my friends and others I know. While I've not lied to them, the mask has meant deception by omission, by giving a false impression. This has meant, on certain points, my friends have been friends with a mask and not the real me. But is that living with integrity? I don't think so. I want people to be friends with the real me. As such, I have to be open about who I am. That doesn't mean being in your face about it. What it does mean is that if either conservatism or polyamory doesn't come up in a conversation, as they very often don't, I want that to mean because it's irrelevant to the discussion, not out of any fear or dread I may have about what people might think of me. Number two, I'm well aware that circumstances might force me to come out anyway, and at the most inopportune time. I'd rather come out due to my own decision and on my own terms. Number three, there are practical benefits to coming out. The more of us who come out, the more of us who are able to find others who are like us, the more of us who are able to network, the more of us who can support each other, the fewer of us who feel alone, and the stronger we are together. That's nothing to sneeze at. I also have to think to the years ahead. This funeral was a stark reminder that all of us are going to die one day, as much as I don't like that. That's going to leave those who love us bereaved and in mourning, which alone will be pretty painful for them. But it occurs to me that staying in the closet like this deceased gentleman did would be putting future partners of mine in an even worse situation. It could easily mean a situation where they have to suffer in silence, where their grief is scorned or dismissed as illegitimate, or where I can't leave them anything without some rather roundabout means, by inheritance. To do that to a partner is just gratuitous cruelty, and it's not right to do that to someone who loves you. To avoid doing that, I have to come out, and during my lifetime, not by inflicting a surprise in my will when they're already upset. Number 4, I'm tired of the mudslinging between conservatives and polyfolk. I want people on both sides not only to be careful with the truth, but to think about what they might be doing to one of their own. Perhaps my coming out will force them to do that. Number 5, I see the opportunity to build some bridges. Goodness knows it's becoming a more hostile and dangerous world out there. In such a world, we survive and thrive the best when we stand together and work together despite our differences, not when we shun each other because of them. But to stand and work together, we need to understand each other. I feel that my position, grounded in both the conservative and polyamorous camps, puts me in an unusually good position to promote understanding because of how intimately I know both sides. But I can only do that if I come out. And if my coming out leads to more understanding or even reconciliation, then I'll have done a good deed. I look over these 5 reasons, and I conclude that it's time for me to come out. At this point, some people might have one further question for me. Given the tension between conservatism and polyamory, just how do I reconcile them? Well, that's another fair question. I'm glad to say that I have at least part of the answer on at least a preliminary basis, though I continue to explore and wrestle with the question. And I'd like to invite you to join me in exploring this question as a case study on reconciling 2 competing identities. I'd like to lay my thoughts out for you, first on the 2 identities on their own, then on how they interact with each other. I plan to do this in 3 episodes, not including this introduction. The first of these episodes will deal with the conservative side of the equation. What is conservatism? How do I understand it? And what do I see in it as someone who's well educated and who's poly? So please join me in that episode. And as we continue the conversation there, I want to ask some things of everyone participating in this conversation. I ask everyone, no matter which side you're on, to remember the humanity in the other side, to assume good intentions from the other side, unless there's evidence to the contrary, and to withhold judgment on my position or anyone else's until all the puzzle pieces are in place. Goodness knows, we can certainly use a little less premature judgment and a little less hatred in this world. And on this point, I think the deceased gentleman and I would probably have agreed. Rest eternal grant unto him, O Lord, and let light perpetual shine upon him.